Offseason. The Dolphins still have 2 games left to play in the regular season, but knowing what they have to work with is going to be important for us to build the blueprints needed for the Dolphins to be able to take the next step as a football team.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Dolphins fans? Kyle Krabs, Locked On Dolphins, your team every day here on the Locked On Network. Today is Wednesday, December 28th, 2022. We're trying a little something different for those of you on the YouTube channel with the videos set up today, so don't mind me. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of being an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? When that's the case, this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On, all caps, in the game. And I will definitely be recommending anybody who loves mobile games and football and strategy to check out that game. And that's kind of why we are where we are right here on the show today, because we are looking at strategy for the offseason and understanding and painting the appropriate picture of where the Dolphins are, where the Dolphins can go, setting expectations for the hurdles ahead, and going from there. So let's start with this. The Dolphins play in Foxborough against the New England Patriots on Sunday. And if the Dolphins win and the Jets lose, the Dolphins will be punching their ticket to the playoffs. If it happens, great. It's going to happen. But the Dolphins are in the midst of a 4-game losing streak. We currently do not know the status of quarterback Tuatanga, who was placed in concussion protocol after Monday, discussing with team physicians some concussion symptoms. And then upon review, obviously there's this play at the end of the first half. And then Dr. Alan Sills comes out and says, upon further review of the game footage, there was nothing that would have triggered any kind of response from concussion protocol. And again, we talked about it at length yesterday. I'm not a concussion specialist. I'm not a head injury specialist. I cannot go down that rabbit hole. And everybody has a lot of opinions. And I'll say this, Tua Tagovailoa has the right to decide what's best for him and his future and his family and his playing career. Whatever he decides to do when that time comes, great. But in the meantime, I'm going to talk about the things that I can talk about. And that includes kind of where the Dolphins have stacked themselves up from an assets perspective. And before we talk about assets, I think it is important to remember that player development is not always linear. And the Dolphins are a team that has a nucleus that is populated with a lot of young players that are going to continue to become better football players over the next couple of seasons. That, I think, is your biggest area for growth within the margins for what the Dolphins are primed to do. Now, they still need to go find some players at the end of the day. And they have some picks at their disposal that are going to be helpful in figuring that out. But right now it's not pretty, because if you stack the Dolphins up against the rest of the league, on the website tankathon.com, and it illustrates what picks belong to what teams, and it illustrates the current draft order as indicated by the strength of schedule across the NFL. Here's what I can tell you. The Dolphins currently own picks 54, picks 86, and presumably pick 70 or 76 from the New England Patriots. 3 top 100 picks, none in the top 50. You can live with that. But then a couple of late day 3 picks as well. If you were to use the trade value chart that teams use and have historically used different versions of to measure how much draft capital you own, the Dolphins are dead last in the NFL in existing current draft capital for 2023. I don't know that that's a bad thing. I'm going to be honest. I don't know that that's a bad thing because I think about what this team needs. This team has a young nucleus. This team has players on rookie contracts. This team has talent. I think there's some underperforming areas of the team. I think there's some injuries that have negatively hindered the team. But the Dolphins, they're 439.7 points in accordance to Tankathon in the chart that they choose to use. And there's a bunch of different charts, the value draft picks at different values. 32nd in the NFL, very closely behind the San Francisco 49ers. Here's the good news. You can take picks 54, 76, and 86 as currently projected by Tankathon for the Dolphins' 3 day 2 picks. You could piece all those together and you could go up and make a splash and get one player in the first round and get into the first round if you felt it was necessary for one player. You could take 1, 2, or all 3 of those players and trade them for existing NFL veterans at marginalized positions. And I emphasize marginalized positions because when I think about the Dolphins roster, I think about this. A lot of their primary soft spots, areas of improvement, running back, tight end, left guard, linebacker, safety. We need some corners as well, unless we're going to change the scheme, which I'm probably going to end up advocating for when we're finished collecting all the information between now and the end of the season. Those are all positions that the league has historically not coveted at premier price, including tight end. And you're starting to see the uptick in the tight end position from a financials perspective, for sure. But those position groups being non-premium positions gives the Dolphins an inside track where you can go out and you can land a quality starter on an existing NFL contract at a non-premium position for a non-first round pick. Now, you're going to have to strategize the right people. And I'm not sitting here saying trade 54, trade 76, trade 86, and don't look back and go out and get a bunch more NFL players because you also have to balance the salary the salary cap component into this. And then there's also the layer of what can the Dolphins get for players on the roster? Well, do the Dolphins have an opportunity to trade players on contract years? We're going to talk about what remains for the Miami Dolphins from a upcoming free agent class next here on the show. But before we do need to tell everybody once again about our friends over at Pro Football GM. This game, it's a blast. And it's right up the alley of what we're doing here today on the show. They're our new partner and sponsor for today's episode, the mobile football game, Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL general manager and managing your own franchise, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the coaches and coordinators, trading players, making draft picks, navigating through your franchise with free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of a season. All of this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want, when you want to. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about here today is the stuff that you actually actively have to do in the game. It's cool. Locked On Dolphins listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in the game store. That's Locked On, so make sure to check it out today. Download the game. Just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your franchise today. So the Dolphins, from a salary cap space perspective, we've talked about they have 3 day 2 selections. That is not a bad number of day 2 selections, but between trading players currently on the roster or trading those draft selections for players not on the roster, or using them to trade up in the draft, the Dolphins will have flexibility, but I would not be surprised if they do work to manufacture some additional cap space, unless they are just going to punt on the class altogether. And that goes down another rabbit hole about, what the quality of this year's draft class is. I'll say this, the Dolphins picked another good year to not have a first round pick. I definitely think that there has to be some strategy with the decisions to invest draft picks in places when, like, this draft class, obviously we do the evaluations for the Draft Network, which is Draft Network up here. And we love player evaluation. But we just went through and stacked the board. We're getting ready to bring back our mock draft simulator. We're in beta testing now. It came down when we made the website change right at the draft last year, and we recoded it. And what that is you pick your team, you go in. Everything else around you is simulated. Teams pick for needs. There's team tendencies that are in there. And it runs off a board that we set on the back end that lists the players in a predictive order in which we think they're going to come off the board. And then the algorithm decides to pull, okay, this team has needs at this position. In this position, this is the top ranked player at their top need. 90% of the time, and it's a hypothetical number, don't want to give away how the sausage is made, pick that player. Right. So we just, like, literally yesterday did the predictive board for it. And we stacked it up and we got to about six players. And we said, man, like, don't really feel good about putting any of these guys at number 7. And then you have to fill the board. So you get over it and you start stacking again. And then you get to 20. You're like, man, I really don't feel good about any of these guys getting stacked on the board this high. So for Miami, like, they don't pick till 54. And I think appropriate, like, good value in this class again is going to come late on day 2. And some of that's impacted because the college eligibility, they granted the college kids the extra COVID year. So everybody got a free year, not a free year. Everybody had an additional year of college football eligibility. So you got seniors who played 4-year starters that could be 5-year starters if they wanted to and didn't have to leave and go to the pros. And, like, that's still created this bottleneck in the draft where better prospects are available later in the draft. But if you look at the early portions of this draft for the second consecutive year, I get to 8, I get to 20, and I get to 30. And I'm like, man, like, these are my options? This kind of stinks. So I say that to kind of paint the picture for the draft order. But as far as free agency, the Dolphins are currently projected to be 26th in the NFL in salary cap space. They have $235 million in commitments as things currently stand amongst their top 51 players on the team. Don't let that number freak you out, though. This can change very rapidly, and I expect that it will. The Dolphins are not a team that has tapped into any significant amount of void year strategy. They have a couple players. Void years are years in which a player is accountable for salary cap space on the roster, but is not actively on the roster. There's a whole layer of manipulation that can be conducted with that. From a dead cap perspective, in 2023, it's a blank slate. They're really in good shape. We have a little bit of dead money for Verone McKinley for initially cutting him after signing him as UDFA. We have Chase Edmonds, $600,000 in dead cap space. Cameron Good as a draft pick that you cut when he did make the active roster, $85,000 in dead cap space. Everything else is very marginal. So you're not wasting any money on dead cap, and that in itself is a huge win. And now the strategy is, okay, like, what percentage of your cap are you comfortable taking in dead cap space? What percentage of your cap are you looking to manipulate with players that are going to be here? What players are you comfortable parting ways with? And I'm going to be honest, there's going to be some guys that are probably going to have the axe dropped on. But I don't see very many I don't see very many restrictions from the Dolphins getting to a very competitive amount of salary cap space that they can then strategize. And if they are going to be one of these teams that now that they are definitively in the winning window, they want to embrace void year. They signed Eric Fisher, right? And they signed Eric Fisher to a 1-year, $3 million contract. This is the first time I've really seen the Dolphins dive into void cap. 1 year, $3 million. He's an expiring contract at the end of the year. And the Dolphins are responsible for $848,000 of the money this year. $2.1 million for 2023, and then $537,000 in 2024, 2025, and 2026. So what they have done is they have created a runway of absorbing 1 year in dollar spending. The difference, and this is a new trend for the league, is that kind of dollar expenditure has not historically been done in a way in which the player's no longer under contract. It's like you're automatically signing yourself up for dead cap. And they're putting it into the contract. That's new. Usually it's always been just you sign the contract, there's non-guaranteed money in there, there's guaranteed money in there. If you're gone before the end of the guaranteed money, it becomes void. But here's what you can do, and this is what's really interesting. If the Dolphins get to this offseason and they re-sign Eric Fisher, they can redistribute the void years as is currently stated, and in some cases, you can even save money. So if the Dolphins re-signed Fisher, hypothetically, to another $3 million deal, and they took the 2.1 that he's on the books for, you can actually reduce that number and then put the player back on the roster and save money, right? So that is one way for the Dolphins to kind of work around their salary cap restrictions, but this is also going to be accomplished with cuts, and this is also going to be accomplished with restructures. So I think that's important to emphasize here. Now, Miami will have an opportunity to carry over some cap space as well, and that will move the needle. That will definitely help the Dolphins in their efforts as well. But we are going to set the table here just quickly, briefly, with a couple of names that I look at and I'm going to be evaluating more closely here towards the end of the year, just understanding that these are players that Miami could or could not have a future with based on their financial ramifications. That's up next here on Locked On Dolphins. But before we get there, today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a new slate of football podcasts that we know you're going to love. That's why you can find an episode of The League available as a bonus episode on Locked On NFL. Narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary smack talker Richard Sherman and sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks. The Look is an 8-part docuseries about the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to America's favorite sport, pro football. Our bonus episode is called The Way of the Cowboy and is an incredible story of how the 1977 Dallas Cowboys brought in Bruce Lee's protege to teach their defensive martial arts, ushering in a new approach to the way the league is trained. Each story equals equal parts of history, entertainment, and social commentary. So head over to Locked On NFL for a bonus episode of The League or catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts. Available now. Audible, get in the game. Here are expiring contracts for the Dolphins. I think we start there and understand that any of these players you bring back are going to have to toll into where the Dolphins' currently salary cap space sits. They're currently 26th in the NFL in salary cap space. We can make a lot of room happen with a lot of different strategies, and I don't think the Dolphins will be hurting with any of these. Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback, Myles Gaskin, Raheem Mostert, and Jeff Wilson at running back. Savon Ahmed is a restricted free agent. Trent Sherfield and River Craycraft are expiring contracts at wide receiver. Mike Gesicki and Adam Shaheen at tight end. Michael Dieter, Greg Little, Brandon Shell at offense. Also Eric Fisher with the void years on your offensive line. Defensive line, Trey Flowers, John Jenkins, Justin Zimmer. Melvin Ingram, Duke Riley, Elena Roberts, Andrew Van Ginkel, Sam McGuavin at linebacker. Eric Rowe, Nick Needham, Justin Bethel, Clayton Fejedelem at defensive back, and then Thomas Morstead at punter. So here's the thing that really jumps to me. The nucleus is really in place, right? You got to figure out the running back room, which we said. Trent Sherfield's one to watch. Are you just going to choose to elevate Eric Ezukanma, or are you going to bring Trent Sherfield back? Gesicki and Shaheen, we're going to have to rebuild the tight end room. We knew that. Right tackle position is, are you going to just give it back to Austin Jackson? If you are, that spot is taken care of, and then you need depth up front. So offensively, you're looking at tight end, running back, offensive line depth. Not really a surprise. And then, of course, there's the whole big magical question right now with Tuatanga and all the calls for him to walk away from the game. And Tua's going to play this year if and when he's cleared. From there, we're going to play the wait and see game. Trying to strategize some, and it's not me wishing that Tua Tagovailoa goes away. As I said this yesterday, I think you can win games with Tua Tagovailoa. He's got a very unique skill set. The teams are pressed in unique ways to play. But I got to let the dust settle on that before I talk about that at all. You know, he's under contract. We're operating in the assumption that he's here, but I think the Dolphins are going to need somebody else, somebody better than Teddy Bridgewater to come in. And we'll see how Teddy plays if he plays against the Patriots. You know, that's a big evaluation window for what kind of caliber of a quarterback you need. So offensively, you're looking at running back, tight end, offensive line depth. You need defensive line depth. Remake the linebacker room in its entirety. And then your nickel corner safety depth. Here's what I can tell you. You can definitely manufacture some space by cutting Jason Sanders, getting a new kicker under contract. I think that's something that at this point is probably in play for Miami. There's little doubt there. Let me make sure I get my numbers right here. The Dolphins can part ways with Jason Sanders this offseason and incur zero dead cap space. Zero dead cap space. So if the Dolphins waive Jason Sanders, they save $4 million against the salary cap. I'd expect that to happen. Take that money, just give it right to Thomas Morstead, and let's go find a kicker. So that's 4. I would expect there's going to be some contract restructures that are in play. I don't see anybody that I would necessarily advocate for giving a restructure to in the secondary. We do need to figure out financially from the state of Byron Jones. If you were able to trade him it's actually the same either way. You could trade or release him pre-June 1st and save $4 million. Now you're going to eat $14 million in cap space because you restructured his contract last year. That hurts a little bit. It is what it is. If you do it after June 1st, you can save $14 million against the cap, take a $4.8 million dead cap hit this year, and a $10 million dead cap hit in 2024. That's probably preferable. I just don't know that the timeline's going to line up that way if the Dolphins choose to move on. You could probably move him and trade him if we're being honest, because his cash is 2 years and $14 million in each of the next 2 years. You could probably get a late draft pick for him. If the financials were better, you could probably get a better pick. But he's going to be coming off, turning 30, not playing all season, Achilles injury. That ability to sell that as a trade to another team is probably unlikely, if we're being honest. Another player that I kind of have soft circled that I like this player. I really do. But if I'm asking myself if the cap hit and the contract aligns with the production on the field, Jerome Baker the next 2 years is $12.5 and $15 million in cap space. Now, Miami they've already restructured this contract once, but they can transition away from Jerome and potentially save up to $9 million this year, depending on if it's pre or post June 1st. They could transition away pre-June 1st, either trade or cut because they restructured the contract and save $4 million and take a $8.5 million dead cap hit. And again, that's why I made sure to make the point of emphasis. The Dolphins have effectively zero in dead cap right now. So having some is acceptable. It's kind of an accepted part of the process. But if you go pre-June 1st and you cut Jason Sanders, try to trade Byron Jones for what you could get a trade partner for Jerome Baker. There's $12 million in cap space right there. Remember, Christian Wilkins, he's on the books for 10-7. He's going to get a contract extension. That number is going to be smaller. I would expect it's probably 2/3 of that. I would guess after the contract extension, Christian Wilkins is on the book for $6 million next year. And he gets a big payday, and he's probably going to average $20 million per. And we're all going to sit here and we're going to say, how can the Dolphins afford to do this? But it's credit lines. It's not cash, right? And between void years and salary cap, there's enough ways to extend out your credit lines to get the cash out early and manipulate it and then tweak it. Whether it's a credit transfer from one credit account to another credit account. So it's like when you get the credit card limit or you get the bill, and it says, oh, I put $10K on my credit card. I'm not going to be able to pay that. And then you look down and your minimum payment is $123.78. Oh, okay, I can do that, right? So Christian Wilkins, I'd expect that's another $4.5 million. So now potentially you're up to $16 million. From an offensive line perspective, I probably would not be adverse to restructuring Teron Armstead. Teron Armstead right now, he's on the books for 23, 24, 25, 26. His big cap hit is this year. He's got a big-time roster bonus. I'd probably convert the roster bonus to a signing bonus, kick that out throughout the course of the rest of the contract. It's a $9 million roster bonus. Convert a little bit of his base salary. He's earned our trust. He's playing his rear end off. He's an incredibly valuable player. I'd restructure Teron Armstead the first day I have the chance to for 2023. Take a third of his base salary out, make it $12 million, give him a full restructure, take the full roster bonus, make it a signing bonus. So that $12 million, you spread that out over 4 years, and instead of $12 million in allocations, he's under contract 23, 24, 25, 26. 12 divided by 3 is 3. You give it to him as a signing bonus. You're taking $9 million off his cap hit. Now he's on the books instead of 21, he's on the books for 12. Boom, you got $9 million to work with. So now you're 25. We haven't even touched Tyreek Hill. His big money year. Well, one of his big money years, I should say. He's on the books this year with the contract. The Dolphins gave him like $120 million for over 4 years. His salary cap space this year was $6 million, $6.5 million. He's got a $10 million roster bonus and a $16 million base salary. Do the same thing. Take the whole thing, make it a new signing bonus. Tyreek Hill's going to be here. He's 28 years old. Shoot, take $6 million of his base salary and his roster bonus of $10 million, and it's 16. And he's under contract for 23, 24, 25, 26. Take the 16, make it signing bonus. Prorate it all the way out. Now, instead of a $31.5 million dead cap hit, you've cleaned up another $12 million out of that. So now he's on the books for 19. You just create another $12 million in cap space. They'll have plenty of flexibility. They're going to be able to make some noise. They'll be able to get plenty of players signed under contract. Anything from bringing in a big-time impact player. There's nothing the Dolphins aren't going to be able to do. And I thought it was important for us to have this conversation here and now because, A, I don't really feel like talking all that much about the Patriots game until we get a little bit more information. But change is probably coming. There's going to be some upheaval. There's going to be some aggressiveness. And I think that's a good thing because, again, They did the Band-Aid thing. They ripped everything off. They've established the nucleus of the team. The nucleus is strong. Now from here, it's identifying the right players to restructure with the right kind of volume to give you some breathing room. And it's stripping away players that probably, aren't a part of the vision moving forward from here, whatever they may be. And then there's probably going to be some coaching changes. We'll talk about it all here on Locked On Dolphins, your team every day. Fins up. Appreciate you guys checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your Wednesday. We'll talk with you all again tomorrow. Hit subscribe. Make sure you follow along with the ride. We are your team every day here on the Locked